Hey there, I'm Travis Morgan and I've been working at Cotner Auto on Columbus's east side since I was 22. What started with tires and oil has grown into mostly diagnostic and electrical work. It's a family-run shop tucked behind a strip mall near Mount Carmel with just 4 bays and a fenced lot. Welcome to the Dreamland Encounters, where I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. Last October, near the month's end, I was closing up alone. Dave, the other tech, had left early for a school thing and missed a stave tower ways. Cotner was already gone. No big deal. I actually enjoy those quiet moments when the compressors stop and it's just me and my tools. On that Wednesday, I was working on a Ford Edge in Bay 3, replacing a rear wiring harness chewed through, likely by possums or mice. My music played softly as I worked. Suddenly, the lights flickered just once. Super quick. Everything cut out for maybe half a second. Shop lights, music, even my laptop. Then everything came right back on. I checked the breaker panel, but nothing seemed amiss. We'd had weird outages before, but not like this sudden blink. I went back to work, finishing up the wiring and torquing the bracket. That's when things got strange. All the motion sensors in the lot triggered simultaneously. Every single floodlight outside snapped on at once. These lights are set up in 3 separate zones: front drive, side alley, and the fenced yard. And they don't normally communicate. You could wave in one area without setting off light, but this time they all lit up at the exact same moment. I shut off my drill and stepped outside. The air was cold enough to see my breath, but completely still. No wind, no passing cars, just an eerie silence across the strip mall. The lot was silent and empty. Darkness enveloped everything. 2 doors down, the Pizza Hut sat black and quiet. Walking past the garage doors, I stood in the middle of the lot, scanning my surroundings. Absolutely nothing moved. No people, no activity. Everything was flooded with bright light, creating that strange flat color that makes it hard to tell. 3 dim orange lights caught my eye overhead as I turned to go back inside. Gliding incredibly slowly from the west, just above the treetops behind the shop, they moved with a strange heaviness. It felt like they were connected to something massive, yet moving effortlessly. The lights formed a perfect triangular shape, one leading and 2 behind, like a flat arrowhead. What was most bizarre was the complete absence of any connecting structure. No outline, no visible body, just 3 points moving in perfect synchronization, as if linked by an invisible force. Silent and steady, it crawled directly over the shop. Its speed was maybe 15 or 20 miles per hour, slower than any plane I'd ever seen. No wings, no body, nothing reflected, just 3 constant orange glowing points. A strange sensation pressed against my chest as it passed. It wasn't exactly fear, but more like underwater pressure. Breathing became difficult for a few seconds, and my eyes watered slightly. The object continued east, disappearing over the strip mall. I remained motionless until it vanished. Snapping out of my trance, I ran into the office and pulled up the security footage. Camera by camera, I checked everywhere. Front lot, back fence, alley, inside bays, nothing but static lights and empty pavement. Even when I reviewed the exact moment it passed overhead, the cameras showed absolutely nothing. No video evidence, no dark shapes, just emptiness. Last December, right after the first big snow, I was doing my usual morning rounds on the farm near Delaware, Ohio. The farm's been in our family for 3 generations, and we often set up just a couple hundred acres of corn. This was different from our typical Midwest quiet, especially after sunset. That's when I spotted something strange in one of the cornfields I hadn't harvested yet. About 50 feet of one row had its stalks bent at a perfect 90-degree angle right in the middle, not broken or snapped, just precisely folded. This wasn't normal snow or wind damage. When something typically tramples a cornfield, you see broken stalks or crushed plants. But this looked intentional. I ran my hand along the stalks. They were stiff but completely unbroken. I noticed something strange that winter morning. The cornfield looked off. Crisp, clean snow with a single precise line where stalks had been neatly folded. No tracks, no disturbance, just that perfect sharp bend in the rows. Later that night, a dark triangle drifted silently overhead. I shut everything down and drove home, barely sleeping. The whole thing felt too weird to tell anyone. A few nights later, I came in to check a delivery and found the radio in Bay 2 switched on, softly hissing static. I hadn't touched that radio in weeks. Everything else was exactly as I'd left it. Doors locked, nothing moved. But the radio was definitely on. Since then, I've kept a big hand-crank flashlight in my truck. No batteries. I don't trust electricity like I used to. Weeks later, I'm still thinking about that morning. Snow dusted the field lightly, everything seeming normal except for those strange cornrows. I snapped some phone photos, but they didn't quite capture how odd it looked. Around 11:30 p.m. one night, something heavy walked across my roof. Deliberate steps. Not an animal scurrying, but something large moving with careful precision. 4 or 5 steps. Pause. Then, that same measured rhythm again. I lay perfectly still, listening. When it stopped, morning revealed nothing. The snow lay smooth and untouched. No footprints, no marks anywhere. I checked the house, barn, shed, everything pristine, as if nothing had happened. Returning to the field, I looked closer at the bent corn. The folded stalks formed a subtle spiral, almost like a coil running down the row. It seemed intentional, like the corn was trying to signal something. My fingers felt a lingering coldness when I touched the stalks. The rest of the day passed normally. No neighbors, no sheriff, no questions. That night, I stayed inside with the lights on. The corn had always been strange that season. Every morning, I'd check the field and find the stalks folded in a precise spiral pattern, looking almost maintained, though I never saw anyone tending to it. The mystery had lingered for weeks, and I wasn't one for modern gadgets like cameras, even though the idea had crossed my mind. Something about the situation felt like it was watching me just as intently as I was watching it. One afternoon, movement near the tree line caught my eye. I thought it might be a deer or a stray dog, but whatever it was vanished into the woods without a sound. No rustling, no breaking branches, just gone. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Then last week, something strange happened. I was working in the barn when the power suddenly cut out across the entire area. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside. The night sky was crystal clear, stars sharp and bright. In the distance, beyond the trees, a faint glow emerged. This wasn't like typical town lights. It was a steady, soft blue reminiscent of police emergency lights. The glow lingered for about 5 minutes before disappearing completely, and the power restored just as abruptly. It felt like a message, though its meaning remained unclear. I'm Dave Carter, a truck driver from Toledo, with over 15 years on the road. That spring evening, I was hauling a load from Cleveland to Indianapolis, driving through northwest Ohio after dark. I pulled into a small, quiet rest area near Lima to take a break and have something to eat from my cooler. Now the corn's been harvested and the field looks entirely normal. No bent stalks, no patterns, nothing. The snow has melted, leaving soft, muddy ground. But even now, when I'm alone, I sometimes hear a quiet pacing on the roof, or catch a glimpse of that strange blue light through the trees. Each time, the hair on my arm stands up. I can't explain what happened in that field. I don't know if it was someone watching, something manipulating the landscape, or just my mind trying to make sense of these unexplained events. But one thing I'm certain of, that perfect sharp spiral pattern wasn't a coincidence. And whatever moved across my roof that night left absolutely no trace behind. The rest area was quiet, almost eerily so. No crickets chirping, my porch light on, half expecting the pacing to return, but there was only silence. Days passed, and the mystery remained unexplained. The wind farm job was simple. 2 turbines spread across a few hundred acres past the Snake River. My role in maintenance didn't offer much glamour, just routine checks, walking dirt access roads alone. In October, I'd switched to evening shifts to help a co-worker whose wife was expecting a baby. The hours ran from 2 p.m. to around 10 p.m., which wasn't a tough schedule. That week had been remarkably uneventful. No storms disrupted the site, no wildlife wandered near the equipment. My tasks were straightforward, logging numbers and running diagnostics. As always, I carried a standard Motorola handheld radio to check in with dispatch every couple of hours. The night started ordinarily enough. I pulled into a roadside lot with scattered trucks, dim street lights, and a typical highway feel. Complete silence surrounded me. No distant traffic sounds, not even a highway hum. After shutting off the engine and stretching, I noticed something odd with my phone. Battery was dropping unusually fast, plummeting from 80% to 60% within minutes. The cold didn't seem a reasonable explanation, since it wasn't particularly chilly. When I looked up, a soft, dim, orange glow hovered above the distant tree line. This wasn't like city lights or a sunset, more like a lantern suspended in invisible fog, completely motionless and hanging low in the sky. Not bright enough to cast shadows, but definitely present. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks on me. I wasn't drinking, just tired from a long day of driving. Curiosity drew me to move around, and I noticed something bizarre. My phone's battery drained faster when I moved away from the truck. Stepping back inside, the drain stopped completely. When I tried to start the truck, nothing happened. Just a dead clicking sound, though the cab lights worked fine. I wasn't panicked. I had jumper cables and could call for help if needed. I paced around, scanning the area with my flashlight. A few trucks in the distance had running engines, but no one was outside. That orange glow remained, seeming to wait for something. After about 10 minutes, I tried the engine again. This time, it started immediately. As I prepared to leave, the glow vanished completely, as if it had never existed. My phone's battery was back to 78% and stable. I shook my head, bewildered by the entire experience. My night shift at the wind farm was like any other. I was walking the grounds, checking turbines, using a radio with a set of fixed channels. Near turbine 9, strange static started interrupting my communication. It wasn't full white noise, but more like distant, intermittent pulses and blips. The signal was low and faint, barely 2 bars. I assumed it might be highway patrol or a nearby farm bleeding into our channels, which sometimes happens. I spoke into the mic, Unit 3, check-in channel. No response came, just those odd, sporadic pulses. Switching channels made no difference. Later, driving back on the highway, my radio crackled with static and distant, barely audible voices. The transmission lasted only seconds before fading out. I adjusted the dial, but nothing else came through. The rest of the trip was routine. The next night, something similar happened near Turbine 2. Different location, but an identical signal. What caught my attention was how the sound only appeared when I wasn't speaking. The moment I'd key the mic, it would go silent. As soon as I stopped talking, the static returned. This time, the sound persisted longer. As I walked around trying to understand its origin, it seemed to follow my steps. The audio was too low to distinguish clearly, so I started recording it on the radio's voice memo function, mostly to prove to my supervisor that I wasn't imagining things. At home, I transferred the recording to my laptop and listened through headphones. The first minute was just typical sounds, my footsteps, breathing, gravel crunching. Then the static began. Initially, I thought it was the same pulsing pattern, but when I increased the volume, something changed. I remembered that orange glow, how my phone had drained, and how the truck wouldn't start until the strange phenomenon disappeared. All I wanted was to get home safe. I checked my phone's battery health after fully charging it. No issues. The truck started fine the next day. I can't explain what happened, but the memory remains vivid. Those unexplained sounds, the persistent static, and the unsettling feeling that something was trying to communicate. In the depth of static, something stirred. As I listened closely, I realized this wasn't ordinary noise. Breathing emerged, slow, deliberate. Unlike my own, each breath stretched across 6 or 7 seconds. Inhale, pause, exhale. The static seemed woven from these breaths, not just surrounding them. I stopped the recording and sat quietly, scanning my house. Nothing appeared wrong, but an unsettling feeling lingered. The next day, I brought the radio to work and asked my co-workers about potential interference. Derek, who shared night shift duties, brushed it off with jokes about ham radio signals or military transmissions. I kept the breathing to myself. That night, I switched to Channel 6, a frequency we rarely used. My story begins on a late March evening in 2018, deep in Nebraska's remote landscape. After 15 years of long-haul trucking, I was hauling fertilizer from South City toward Colorado Springs, mostly following Route 83. The road stretched endlessly, empty land, scattered gas stations with terrible coffee, and that impossibly isolated stretch between North Platte and Mackett. Initially, the radio seemed normal. Then something shifted. A hiss changed pitch without any apparent movement. I looked around. No wind, no animals, nothing. I tapped the mic. Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there? Silence answered. After releasing the mic, another breath emerged, louder this time, streaming directly through the speaker. Not a recording, but something live. The sound felt simultaneously mechanical and organic, like a massive lung the size of a furnace. I backed away from Turbine 12, scanning the road and field's edge. Visibility ended after just 10 feet. Nothing but empty scrub, sage, dirt, and distant hills. I switched the radio off, then on again. Complete silence. My final evening shift that week was meant to be routine, covering for another worker to close out the week. near the Battery Bank's south end. The radio suddenly came alive by itself. It jumped erratically between channels. 1, 3, 5, producing only static before settling on channel 2, our primary frequency. I was driving through open country on a long, empty highway. Just barbed wire and fields stretching out in every direction. When something goes wrong out here, you're completely alone. It was just past 9 p.m. near mile marker 211 when I first noticed something strange on my CB radio. I always keep the radio on low, but this time a mechanical clicking sound caught my attention. It wasn't static or Morse code, just precise, fast clicks like a typewriter cycling evenly across all channels. No matter how I adjusted the squelch, the sound persisted, almost embedded in the signal itself. Scanning the landscape revealed nothing unusual, just open fields under a clear sky. But then I saw a star behaving differently. At first I thought it was a windshield smudge. Tapping and wiping changed nothing. Every time the clicking hit a specific rhythm, 3 quick beats, then 1 slow, the star would shift slightly left, maybe an inch from my perspective. I killed the CB. The clicking stopped, but the star kept moving. Driving at 65, I watched it remain sharp and white, twitching periodically. Past marker 213, it stopped moving. The sky returned to normal. Curiosity drew me back the next night, northbound around 9:20 p.m. The pattern repeated exactly. Approaching marker 213, the clicking started. That same bright star sat motionless until the rhythm triggered its slight leftward movement. I tried calling out on the CB, hoping someone else was nearby. Silence. No response. Not even the usual squelch feedback. Over the next few nights, I timed its behavior carefully. I kept hearing my own voice from the previous day on the main channel. A strange recording playing exactly as it happened before. Unit 3, open comms, anyone out there? Followed by that same pause and breath. I shut everything off and drove back to the shop, skipping the usual checklist. The next week, I grabbed a new radio unit without explanation. The old one likely remains in the drawer. Since then, nothing unusual has occurred. No static, no mysterious voices. I still have the recording on my laptop, but I haven't played it again. Those strange encounters always lingered in my memory. It began on a typical late July Thursday evening in a quiet neighborhood outside Missoula. Walking Casey, my black lab mix, around the block before nightfall, I noticed the classic Montana setting, chain-link fences, gravel driveways, and porch lights flickering on and off. The day had been brutally hot, one of those dry heat waves that make asphalt sticky and cause pine sap to bake onto tree bark. Even at 8:30, the air felt like standing next to an open oven. Casey, however, seemed completely unfazed. My truck experiences were equally unsettling. One particularly windy night, moonlight revealed grain fields rippling beneath me. Between mile markers 211 and 213, everything went eerily silent. The wind disappeared completely, with no sound from the rig and no road vibration, just silence and those peculiar clicks. During that night, I noticed something odd. When the star shifted, my interior dome light flickered briefly, a single, subtle pulse like a momentary voltage drop. My gauges remained steady and the engine ran smoothly, but the light definitely dimmed for an instant. I kept both hands on the wheel, avoiding the CB while the clicking continued softly, almost like a scheduled check-in. Over the next month, I drove through that stretch 4 more times. Each time, the same pattern repeated precisely. Only between markers 211 and 213, and only between 9:10 and 9:40 p.m. Once, I pulled over at mile marker 212 and idled with the CB on. The clicking grew more intense, not louder, but more present, as if creeping closer to my consciousness. The star moved again, pulsing slightly brighter for half a second. My dome light flickered in sync. Then came that distinct smell of hot copper and ozone, a scent I'd only encountered once before, after an inverter fried in an old cab. I immediately threw the truck in gear and kept moving. Afterward, I avoided that route, telling dispatch I preferred going west through Ogallala. It cost me extra hours, but I didn't care. My last drive through that section was in January 2020, just before quitting the road. Snow lined the shoulders, and a full moon illuminated a clear sky. I'd almost forgotten about the previous encounters when suddenly, around 9:15, the CV popped once. No clicking, just a single pop and complete silence. When I looked up, the star had already shifted, seeming to have been watching ahead of schedule. Casey trotted ahead on our usual walking route, her nose busy exploring the world around her. Halfway down Morgan Street, something shifted. My breath suddenly appeared as white fog, just like on a winter morning. I stopped and breathed again. The result was the same. A clear puff hung suspended in the air. Casey seemed unaffected, still investigating a mailbox post, as if searching for hidden secrets. I slowly turned in a circle. No wind stirred. No unusual sounds broke the silence. The sun lingered low behind the trees, barely touching the horizon. Then it hit me. An Arctic chill struck my chest instantly, like walking into an industrial freezer. No gradual cooling, just pure, sudden cold. Goosebumps erupted across my arms. I tugged Casey's leash, urging her forward. She hesitated, sniffed the air, then resumed walking. With each step, the temperature plummeted. My ears stung, my nose ran. To my right, a small metal fence post began transforming. Frost spread rapidly across its surface, like watching time-lapse photography in real life. I stared, blinking, trying to understand. My hand started to reach out, but stopped an inch away. This wasn't just cool evening air. This was dead of winter freezing. Casey's response was immediate. A low, steady growl emerged from her throat. She stood stiff, ears pulled back, tail lowered. Suddenly, she barked sharply and spun around on the sidewalk. Her lunge was so powerful I stumbled, the leash wrapping tightly around my wrist. Then, as quickly as it began, the cold vanished. One moment my breath was foggy and my teeth were chattering. The next, we were back to the sticky, dry heat of the day. No fog, no frost, and incredibly, the leash was gone. Heart hammering, I ran after Casey. My arms felt like they'd been plunged into ice water. She bolted down the street, tail tucked, moving in that panicked, half-hunched way dogs do when pure terror takes over. 3 blocks later, she was scratching frantically at our front door. My hands shook as I unlocked it, and she darted inside, hiding under the table. Standing on the porch, I caught my breath. Everything looked normal. Crickets chirped, porch lights glowed, sprinklers cast misty light, but something felt fundamentally wrong. The street was too still, too perfect, like a meticulously staged scene. Amateur astronomy had been my passion since college, and that night, in Maple Ridge, a small Ohio town, I was doing what I loved. Behind the old high school baseball field, my Celestron Nexstar was set up at 9:15, the only spot near town with minimal light pollution. The janitor knew me well and didn't mind my presence as long as I kept things tidy. The night was perfect, crisp, clear, temperatures in the mid-40s with just a hint of western breeze. 40 minutes into my observation, something caught my eye. A formation of lights approached from the northeast, hovering around 30 d above the horizon. Initially, I thought it might be a military exercise. We weren't far from Wright-Patterson, after all. 6 lights moved in a V formation, reminiscent of geese. 5 blinked like typical aircraft, but the 6th light at the back right remained constant, white and steady. An unusual low hum of engines reached me, yet strangely the unblinking light produced no sound at all. My curiosity piqued. I checked my phone's flight radar app. Nothing showed up in that direction, not even the blinking lights. Using my telescope, I zoomed in. The 5 blinking lights revealed faint outlines. Wings, tail, fins, heat shimmer, definitely jets, probably F-16s. But that 6th light remained an enigma. Days earlier, something strange had happened with my dog, Casey. During a walk, an inexplicable coldness had momentarily gripped us. She'd been nervous, hiding near water for 10 minutes after an incident near a fence post. When she finally emerged, she stayed close and avoided the door. I checked my wrist for marks after the walk. Nothing. No rope burn, no redness. It was as if the leash had never existed. That night, I partially retraced our route. The fence post looked unchanged, metal warm from the day's heat, grass dry and scratchy. The next morning, I discovered the short leash was missing. I searched everywhere, laundry room, couch cushions, car trunk, finding nothing. Even a daylight street walk revealed no trace. I knew I hadn't dropped it. I'd felt it on my wrist when it vanished. We skipped walks for a few days. When I bought a replacement, same brand and length, it felt strange in my hand. Casey seemed mostly fine, still occasionally barking at dark windows. A habit she'd always had. I'd never experienced that bone-chilling coldness again. Not so suddenly or deeply. The block felt different now, altered somehow. We crossed it without thinking, the Leechman never reappearing. That moment would later replay in my mind. What if I'd crossed the street differently? What if Casey hadn't been on a leash? A cold sensation swept through me briefly. Overhead, 6 jets rumbled low across the sky, moving west. 5 flew in a tight V formation, but one light behaved differently. About 20,000 feet up, this jet didn't blink, make sound, or signal a tracker. It drifted slightly, veering 5 due to the right before correcting itself. While the others continued their path and vanished behind the tree line, this unblinking light stopped directly over the field. Through my telescope, I saw a pure white solid sphere. No outline, no shadow. Unlike stars that shimmer, this remained perfectly still. A minute passed in silence. Suddenly, it moved straight up. Not gradually, not in an arc, but like a cursor being dragged upward on a screen, smooth and precise. It rose to twice its original height and stopped. A slight tremor ran through me, not panic, but that unsettling feeling when something defies explanation. I stepped back, observing with naked eyes. The light was dimmer now, higher, but still a steady white. Then it blinked, 1 full second of brightness, then gone. I waited. Nothing. The wind picked up, rustling dry leaves across the field. Another blink, another second-long flash, slightly higher than before. I sensed it was still climbing. The transition was jarring, dark sky to bright light in an instant. No flare, no fade, like switching between frames. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I packed up quickly, my mind racing. It was late September last year when I moved into my quiet apartment in Salem, Massachusetts. I moved into an old brick building on a side street near downtown. Cheap rent, close to work, with quiet neighbors. It seemed perfect at first. 2 big windows faced the street, one in the living room and another in the bedroom. A street lamp outside cast a yellowish glow at night, and I noticed how dark the room's corners remained, even with lights on. The first strange moment happened while I was relaxing on the couch. A shadow caught my eye, not a person or tree, but a dark, shapeless form like a smudge just beyond the living room window. When I looked directly, it vanished instantly. Over the next week, these glimpses continued, always at room corners or just outside windows. The shape had no clear edges, just a dark form hovering as if watching from a distance. I tried rationalizing it away. Work stress, long hours, imagination playing tricks. But the feeling grew heavier. One night, about a week after moving in, I was making dinner when I saw the shape again, this time between the living room and hallway. Something changed after that night. Now I go out less. Where I used to set up my equipment 3 or 4 times a week, now it's maybe once or twice a month. I haven't told anyone in town. It's the kind of place where people discuss lawnmowers. I'm already known as the space guy. Don't need to be the crazy one too. I checked the satellite logs after that night. Nothing passed overhead in that window. No weather balloons, no military flight notices. Occasional whispers and soft rustling sounds would drift through the apartment when everything else was completely silent. Whenever I tried to focus on these sounds, they'd disappear. The way the shape vanished wasn't normal. No flicker, no gradual fade, just gone in an instant. I stood still, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. It had faded away like smoke, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tossed everything into the Jeep and left, knowing I'd never look at flight formations the same way again. The feeling of being watched had become my constant companion. It started with subtle hints, strange sounds that would abruptly stop when I focused on them. I mentioned these odd occurrences to Clara during one of her visits, but her light-hearted ghost jokes did nothing to ease my growing unease. As weeks passed, the encounters grew more frequent. A shadowy shape would appear just at the periphery of my vision, never fully revealing itself, always just out of reach. I tried everything to make it go away, changing lighting, closing curtains, turning on every lamp in the room. Nothing worked. My phone began acting strangely too. Apps would freeze near the windows, the screen would flicker inexplicably, and the camera would refuse to open. One night, I attempted to capture the shape outside, but the photo showed only static. I quickly deleted it, convincing myself it was just a technical problem. The most terrifying moment came while I was preparing for bed. Passing the bedroom window, I saw it standing beneath the tree, darker than the surrounding night, a silhouette that seemed to absorb all light, completely motionless. When I blinked, it vanished. Online research into the building's history yielded nothing unusual. No strange reports, no odd stories from previous tenants. The neighbors were friendly but reserved, and no one had ever mentioned anything out of the ordinary. That weekend, I stayed home all day, trying to distract myself. As evening approached, I sat in the living room with just a small lamp for company. This time, the presence felt different. Instead of quickly fading, it lingered, almost as if waiting. When I looked directly, it didn't immediately disappear. My heart raced as I sat motionless, the air growing heavy and cold. Goosebumps covered my arms. After what seemed an eternity, the shape dissolved, drifting away like smoke. I started keeping a journal to track these encounters. They consistently happened in the late afternoon or evening, never in the morning. No clear pattern emerged, but the constant sensation of being watched never left me. I sought explanations from others, but their suggestions of sleep paralysis or lighting tricks never felt right. Then came the night it appeared outside my bedroom window, at the edge of the yard. I cracked the window open, my curiosity overwhelming my fear. One night in Fairbanks, during a power outage around 7 p.m., my world shifted unexpectedly. While wrapping up a frozen pizza in my living room, the lights suddenly vanished without warning. Darkness enveloped everything, and I knew this was just another typical local quirk. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside to investigate. The street lay pitch black, with only moonlight filtering through thin clouds. No streetlights or headlights broke the silence, just the usual stillness that settles over the city when everything goes quiet. Then something extraordinary caught my eye, a bright, perfectly spherical light hovering about 30 feet above the road. This wasn't a normal light. A steady white-blue glow seemed to breathe life into the darkness below. I initially thought it might be a drone or a neighbor's spotlight, but everything remained dark and silent. No drone hum, no engines, not even the familiar buzz of electricity, just this motionless, silent light. I pulled on my jacket and stepped onto the porch, flashlight and phone in hand. As I attempted to call someone, I realized communication was impossible. Weeks of strange experiences followed. I found broken branches scattered beneath my window some mornings, with no footprints or signs of disturbance. Exhaustion consumed me, and despite my doctor saying I was fine, I felt drained. I tried everything: new curtains, bright daylight bulbs, rearranging furniture, but nothing stopped the shape from appearing. Then one evening, everything changed. I searched every corner and window, and the shape was gone. Relief washed over me for the first time in weeks. That night, I slept with windows open and lights off, the air feeling fresh and clean. At 3 a.m., a soft tapping woke me. My heart raced as I sat up, but saw nothing, just an empty street and quiet trees. Since then, the shape appears less frequently. Sometimes I catch a fleeting glimpse in my peripheral vision, but it doesn't stay. The feeling of being watched has diminished. I still don't understand what it was or why it was there. It never attempted to harm me or communicate. It simply watched and faded away. As a local Fairbanks resident, I'm used to the cold, long nights and unexpected moments that come with living here. The Brooks Ranges tundra stretches out like a frozen canvas, a world of low shrubs and persistent snow even in early May. As a field tech with the Arctic Wildlife Study team, I've seen my share of remote landscapes, but this particular week tracking caribou was different. We'd set up camp in a location miles from any hint of civilization, the kind of place where silence feels almost tangible. That night I was on watch outside our tent cluster, nursing a thermos of coffee while the rest of the team wound down inside. The sky hung clear and star-studded, with an absolute stillness that felt almost unnatural. No breeze stirred the landscape. As I scanned the snow-covered terrain, something caught my eye. A low, bright object hovering about 50 feet from camp. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd encountered. It was a steady, white glow brighter than a flashlight, but without the harsh beam. Instead, it illuminated the snow with an eerily even light, like a giant lantern suspended in mid-air. My digital watch stopped ticking, and an unsettling quiet descended. When I shone my flashlight at the orb, it didn't react normally. Instead, it shifted slightly to the left, almost as if acknowledging my presence. Transfixed, I backed onto the lawn, watching. The porch light was dead, and nearby electronics had gone completely silent. After what seemed like an eternity, though time felt distorted, the orb began to fade. First a shimmer, then nothing. The power remained out for a solid half hour, and the lights finally flickered back. Everything snapped to life. The microwave clock, my phone signal, even the car key fob beeping as if nothing had happened. I've seen no fireflies, drones, or planes that could explain what I witnessed. Just that silent, glowing sphere. The next day in town, people smiled and suggested it was probably a weather balloon or military test, but their explanations rang hollow. Why did all my electronics die? What was that light? To this day, I've never encountered anything like it again. Just that one inexplicable moment on the tundra, a memory that defies explanation. I was alone on night watch when it happened. The tundra stretched out endlessly, silent and dark. Suddenly, a light appeared, not moving, just hanging there in the emptiness. I stepped closer, my boots crunching softly against the snow, but the light remained perfectly still. At first, I thought it might be a satellite tracker, but something felt different. No hum, no buzz. When I called out to the others, I realized the camp was dark and quiet. Everyone should have been inside. I checked my watch. 1:13 a.m. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the light vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. One moment there, the next, gone. I tried calling again, but no one answered. My head grew fuzzy, the air thick. I stumbled back toward the tents, thoughts sluggish. Inside, the team looked shocked. They said I'd been gone almost 2 hours, which made no sense. I was certain only 10 minutes had passed. My watch was dead, frozen at 1:13. Looking around, I saw the others' watches had stopped at exactly the same moment. When we went outside, the spot where the light had been looked strange, a perfect 10-foot circle of crushed snow, as if something had pressed down firmly. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, just an unnaturally flat ring in the untouched landscape. Jessie, our biologist, said she felt like she'd been dreaming but couldn't remember anything. Nobody could explain the synchronized watch stoppage. We watched the spot for the next day, but nothing happened. The strange circle remained as the snow slowly settled around it. We packed up and headed back to Purdue Bay, the incident lingering in our minds. Even now, I can't explain what occurred. The tundra's long, silent nights feel different to me now. Sometimes in Anchorage, I catch myself staring at my watch, wondering about that moment of unexplained stillness. I've been a fire lookout since childhood, following my father's path, but nothing prepared me for that night. My name is Jake Merrick, and that summer I was stationed near Denali in an old wooden tower perched on a ridge with a sweeping view of wilderness. The job was simple: watch for fires, report any danger, and spend downtime reading or napping. But late July that year was anything but ordinary. Just after midnight on the second night, something unusual began. While scanning the dark horizon with binoculars, strange lights caught my attention. These weren't typical aircraft lights, no blinking red or green markers, just steady pale glows with a faint blue tint. They moved smoothly across the sky, almost floating in an inexplicable pattern, clustering and spacing out like they were patrolling a predetermined route. Communication became impossible. My radio produced only crackling static, and even the backup handheld emitted a low, humming buzz. Each night, the same pattern repeated. Attempts to photograph the lights resulted in nothing more than fuzzy, indistinct blobs. The forest remained eerily silent, punctuated only by persistent electronic hiss. The dogs from nearby cabins seemed to sense something was wrong. Their barking was different, low and growly, not the typical alert sounds. It was as if they perceived an unnatural presence just beyond perception. I began tracking everything meticulously, logging interference times, and noting the light's precise movements. They consistently drifted low over the tree line, moving west-east before vanishing with the sunrise. Midweek, everything changed during a routine walk to the helipad. Behind the trees, a shape caught my eye, tall, slender, absolutely still, but watching. The air around it shimmered like a heat mirage. When I called out, nothing responded. My flashlight revealed only empty space when I swept the beam across where the figure had been. Initially, I assumed some weird atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction, but as days passed and the mysterious lights continued their strange dance across the night sky, I realized something profound was happening, something I couldn't explain. The tower felt isolated, disconnected from the world between midnight and dawn. Perhaps there are moments missing that I'll never get back. The forest had gone eerily silent during those nights. With no wind or insects breaking the stillness, my watch seemed suspended, showing nearly an hour passing in what felt like mere minutes. Strange lights drifted in a slow, predictable pattern around me. I tried convincing myself it was just a trick of light, or a deer in the shadows, but something felt fundamentally wrong. Each night, the radio interference returned precisely after midnight. No matter what frequency I tried, I couldn't reach anyone. An unsettling sensation of being watched followed me constantly. These unexplained phenomena seemed to be happening just for me, as if I was the only witness. On the final night of my vigil, I decided to stay awake until dawn. As hours crept by, the lights returned. The radio hummed with static, and distant dogs barked a soft, steady rhythm. My eyes locked onto one orb as it slowed, hovering almost directly above the tower. It pulsed faintly, almost like it was breathing. My hands trembled in the cold air. The light began to dim and dissolve. Just before vanishing, a soft, almost musical hum vibrated through the air, not loud, but enough to make my skin crawl. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, clear and crisp for a split second. I heard a voice calling my name. Instinctively, I reached for the mic, but the connection cut out as quickly as it had appeared. The next day, I called the ranger station using a landline from a nearby cabin. They had no reports of strange lights or radio issues, seeming to think I was experiencing nothing more than bad weather or poor reception. My frustration grew. I knew what I'd experienced during those isolated nights. Morning arrived with the forest's usual sounds, birds calling, wind rustling through trees. The world seemed to reset, as if the night's strange occurrences had been nothing more than a bad dream. I packed up and left the tower. Back in town, everything felt louder, busier, and less mysterious. Yet, the memories lingered. The evening was winding down at Black Rock Cafe, the sun melting behind the ridge and staining the sky a bruised purple, the same color locals associated with strange lights. I'd been hearing whispers all night about glowing orbs bouncing off limestone walls, but none of it seemed real until John shared his story. "You ever see anything up at Miller's Pit?" he asked, describing orange spheres hovering silently over a blasted rock face at least 15 feet wide, blinking out as suddenly as they appeared. I nodded, steaming milk for his espresso, only half listening. The cafe was quiet, just me, a zoned-out regular, and John at a table near the window. When the door chimed, a man in a crisp black suit entered, no tie, his shoes gleaming under the neon sign. He scanned the room methodically, avoiding eye contact, and went directly to John's table. The fluorescent light seemed to dim slightly as he sat down. John froze mid-drink, his expression tightening. The stranger didn't introduce himself or show identification. Instead, he placed his hands flat on the table and asked in a mechanical tone, "Tell me about the lights." John hesitated, then stammered about orange lights hovering in the area, describing back roads, gravel cut-offs, and abandoned cabins. The man listened without taking notes, nodding once after John finished. I watched from behind the counter, heart racing, half expecting the stranger to vanish into thin air. When John finished his drink, he pushed back his chair. "I've got to go," he said. The man in black responded flatly, "Be safe." John gave me a small, cryptic wave before hurrying out. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from John. When I looked up, the booth was empty. The suited man had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a faint scent. The unnatural lights, fleeting shapes in the trees, and unexplained silence continued to haunt me. No one else seemed to have witnessed what happened, which made it even more unsettling. Some parts of the wild, I realized, are meant to be observed quietly from a distance, never fully understood. The drive home on Route 47 carried the lingering scent of cinnamon and espresso, windows down despite the chill. To my right, the quarry lay silent and dark, broken only by a distant street lamp's glow. Restraint pulled me back from turning onto the gravel access road. Some ghost stories are better left unexplored. Home meant light and routine. Every lamp switched on. I checked my phone. John's text sat alone, making me wonder about his recent experiences. The laptop's fan clicked mechanically, too loud in the silence. I nearly messaged him but hesitated, uncertain what words could capture my unease. Steam curled from my tea at the kitchen table. Soft headlights passed outside, and a dark shape momentarily caught my eye. Just the neighbor's cat. I realized, my racing heart slowing. The local news site offered nothing remarkable. Municipal meetings, a high school band feature, a missing cat. No mentions of strange encounters or secret gatherings. Sleep remained elusive. The alarm clock became my companion. 10:03 a.m., then 1:19. Every house creak sounded like footsteps on gravel. I lay awake until 3:30, anticipating an unexpected knock. Morning light felt weak and pale. Coffee brewing became my morning ritual. I stared at the empty street, thoughts of calling John flickering through my mind. Had he seen the mysterious man again? Experienced unexplained lights. I didn't call. Instead, I poured coffee with an excessive amount of cream, seeking comfort in sweetness. At 7:15, I followed the familiar route past the quarry. Headlights sliced through misty pines, revealing nothing, no glow, no mysterious figures near the cut line. The cafe parking lot approached, and I steeled myself before entering. The door chime announced my arrival. Regulars occupied the counter, no suits in sight. As the last customer left, the neon sign flickered. My hands trembled while flipping the closed sign. Walking to the parking lot under a blue sky, I half expected to see the enigmatic man leaning against my car. Nothing, just John's Prius, wrapped in fog at the curb. The neon sign hummed back to life. Espresso machine hissing. I wiped the bar top, thoughts drifting to the man in the fog. Beans dropped into the grinder as I handed Marisol her cappuccino. Her concerned gaze met mine. "You okay? You look tired?" I spent the night in my car near the observation bunker at the White Sands test range watching for missile launches. At 6:02 a.m. the alert horn sounded. Through the bunker's slit window, I framed the pad with my DSLR camera. A bright flash erupted, and the missile's contrail sliced through the low, thick grey clouds like a white ribbon. Deep jet noise filled the air, gradually fading to a distant whine as the missile climbed out of sight. I snapped a dozen shots, lowering my camera as the sound dissipated. That's when I saw him, a lone figure backlit by floodlights near the service road, shoulders squared at attention. Something felt off from the start. I'd been tracking a figure in a dark suit, barely visible against the muted landscape. No safety gear, just crisp clothing that seemed entirely out of place. When I first spotted this person, they stood motionless near the fence. I zoomed in, then ducked out to investigate. By the time I reached the area, the test crew had completely vanished, leaving only gravel and scattered parachute fragments behind. The mysterious figure was gone. I circled the perimeter, searching every shadowy corner. No footprints, no crushed grass, nothing. My heart racing, I tapped my radio. "Range control, this is Jensen. You have an observer at the south fence." Silence answered me, just as I started walking back. A soft click broke the quiet. I spun around. Earlier, at the diner, the night had felt equally strange. My shift ended with an unsettling sense of being watched. Through the window, only mist and streetlight cones cupped through the darkness. Someone had been there, just beyond sight. At lunch, no one mentioned the previous night's events. It was as if an unspoken agreement had erased everything. The quarry lights, the man in the suit. By evening, the memory had faded to almost nothing. At 9:15, I locked up, set the alarm, and drove away. The sky was clear, stars steady. Catching my reflection, I saw dark eyes and a pale face, an unresolved question hanging in the air. Headlights on fog behind me, waiting for something to blur the lines between what I'd seen and what I'd been told. A flood lamp illuminated a figure standing perfectly still, a man in a black suit so crisp it seemed unreal. Polished shoes gleamed unnaturally, his posture rigid as a carefully positioned mannequin. "Ma'am," he said with unsettling calm, "this area is off limits." I held up my press badge from Defense Tech Weekly. "I have permission for photos." He shook his head, dismissing my claim. "Permission revoked." Returned to the bunker. His face remained blank, yet somehow not hostile. The clock read 6:15. 10 minutes felt like hours. I remembered seeing someone earlier, a dark suit at the fence. "Did you see anyone?" I asked. He checked his watch. "Please step away." When I raised my camera hoping for a quote, he offered only the slightest smile and shook his head. Something made the hair on my arms prickle. I lowered the camera and stepped back. He nodded, then glided, not walked, into the shadows behind the service road, making no sound. I watched until he completely vanished. Returning to the bunker, I found it empty. The test crew gone, vans pulling away, the door locked tight. At 7 a.m., I reached the main gate where a confused security guard informed me of a range closure. "You must have missed the memo," he said. I insisted there was no memo. He shrugged and punched in the gate code. On the highway, I reviewed my photos. Missile blasts cut bright arcs through cloud cover, but something strange caught my eye. A dark blur lingered at the fence line in every shot, a standing figure that vanished instantly, zooming in revealed fabric-like edges with no discernible details, disappearing between frames. By 8:15, I called my editor, my voice shaking as I described the man in black. She explained the range was locked down for hypersonic tests, meaning sensitive photos would be scrubbed. When I mentioned the suited figure, she told me to run the launch pictures and file the rest. I sat in a nearby diner, stirring coffee and scanning the highway through the windows, half expecting to see him standing among the scrubbed pines. I found nothing. Leaving my car with the waitress, I walked to my car. A sealed manila envelope lay on the passenger seat, stamped with the date 6/12. Inside the package was a single slip of paper and 2 closely cropped prints from my fence line photos with no further explanation. I folded the contents and tucked them into the glove box, driving home with a dreamlike sensation. Yellow highway lines faded into dawn, and I half expected to see that dark figure with perfect posture and unblinking eyes in my rearview mirror. but he never appeared. Just before sunrise, I stepped out of the cabin. Baxter, my mutt, trotted at my heel with alert ears, ready for our usual 2-mile loop through the national forest near Cedar Creek. Something felt different that morning. The air was damp, as if rain had fallen overnight, and an eerie silence replaced the typical bird sounds. We followed the dirt path to a fork near a small brook. Baxter splashed in the shallow water while I wrung out my shirt sleeve and sipped from my canteen. That's when I noticed it. A break in the familiar landscape. A clearing I'd never seen before, tucked just off to the left. Wet ground squished under my boots as I pushed through branches, emerging into a space about 20 feet across. Half a dozen mature oaks and maples surrounded me, each trunk bearing an identical, unsettling mark. From ground level to exactly 6 feet high, every tree's bark had been stripped away with impossible precision. The exposed wood looked smooth and pale, as if carefully shaved clean. No rough edges or bark fragments littered the ground, just perfect, horizontal lines encircling each trunk. Baxter hung back at the clearing's edge, hackles raised and whimpering, refusing to enter the circle and shaking his head as if the ground burned. I stepped closer to the nearest oak, running a finger along its surface. Cool and almost slick, with no sign of tool marks or cutting, the scene defied explanation. A chill ran down my spine. I scanned the area carefully. No footprints marred the mud, no broken branches suggested human presence, and my flashlight beam swept across untouched fallen leaves. Realizing I had no phone signal, I clicked the device off. Circling the clearing, I confirmed the height was exactly the same on each tree, deliberate and unnatural. Something felt deeply wrong. Night had settled in and I was alone in the cabin with Baxter, my loyal companion. Something about the forest clearing I'd discovered earlier was deeply unsettling. The perfectly stripped bark on the tree, no tracks, no damage, had left me uneasy. Even Baxter seemed on edge, pressing against my leg and sensing the strange atmosphere. Earlier that day, the silence had been oppressive. No birds chirped, no brook babbled. My flashlight revealed waving branches through low clouds, but nothing moved. The fog pressed close, muffling every sound. An overwhelming feeling of being watched crept over me as I examined the crisp, clean edge of the stripped bark. I hurried back to the trail, leaves crunching underfoot. Gradually, normal sounds returned as I left the clearing's unnatural silence. The forest seemed to exhale with relief at my departure. Once inside the cabin, I slammed the door shut, Baxter's whine piercing the silence. I sank into a kitchen chair, clutching him close and warming my shaking hands with a cup of tea. Staring out the window at the fog weaving between tree trunks, I fired off a text to Aaron, my forestry friend. No response came. The night crept in, and I kept the curtains drawn, repeatedly checking locks. Baxter shadowed me, his nose twitching at unseen corners. A voicemail to the ranger station went unanswered. My dreams were haunted by trees with smooth white bands, bending and stepping closer on invisible roots. Baxter's whimper woke me, and he climbed onto the bed, watching the darkness outside with alert eyes. Morning brought a chance to investigate. With a notebook and tape measure, I returned to the clearing. Sunrise cut through the lingering fog, but the light band had vanished. A thin, papery bark now covered the wood, scabby and irregular. The 6 feet mark was barely visible, warmed by the night's moisture. Light-colored flakes clung to roots, disintegrating at my touch. I documented everything, noting subtle changes in the leaves, edges curled, colors paler near the tree line. Baxter refused to enter the clearing center. I took photos, marked GPS coordinates, and backed away. The forest resumed its normal rhythm. Birds singing, breeze rustling. At home, sorting through the images, I noticed something odd. My phone's first set showed dark trunks, the clearing's ring solid brown. The old point-and-shoot revealed something else entirely. The night stretched out before me, dark and heavy on Highway 50 in eastern Colorado. My car's engine hummed steadily at 65, windows cracked open. As I counted constellations to pass the time, around 1:45 a.m. in late August, the crisp air hovered around 55 deg. Something felt different. Pale rings slightly askew. Something was waiting. Something had changed. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but the signal was weak. The stars hung motionless against the navy sky, pinned like a frozen photograph. Orion's belt eluded me as I searched the sky. 20 miles had passed since my last look, yet the stars remained unchanged. Cassiopeia's familiar curve and the Big Dipper sat exactly where they had been. Rubbing my eyes, I wondered if I'd dozed off, but nothing moved. Slowing to 50, I watched roadside markers slide past. The horizon, just grassland and scattered scrub oaks, should have been shifting relative to the stars. Instead, everything remained locked in place, like a static image behind my windshield. My heart raced. I keyed the CB mic on channel 19. Anybody out there? Static was my only response. The hissing filled the car's silence as I gripped the wheel, driving another 5 miles, trying to shake off my growing unease. Weeks earlier, hiking trail with Baxter had yielded a peculiar photo. A shot of him sniffing near some cut tree edges revealed a faint, out-of-focus swirl in the top right corner. Zooming in showed nothing, no shape, no color, just a blur invisible in the live view. I'd returned to that trail twice since. Each time, the ground looked normal. No 6-foot rings, no bark fragments, no odd fog patches. Baxter stayed close, ears forward, sniffing branches without whining. The photos remained on my desk. Sometimes I studied the close-up of Baxter in the clearing, staring at that faint sky swirl. I still don't know what stripped those trees or why Baxter refused to cross that line. I can't explain why the bark seemed to regrow overnight. But I remember the hush of that circle, how the air bent around it, and how I fled without casting a single fishing line into my morning calm. I drove east, pulling back onto the highway after backing slowly off the turnout, watching the puddle's reflection in the rear view as stars traced their arc. I stepped back into the car, locking the doors, and something felt off. The night sky above me seemed frozen, a stark photograph hanging in the darkness. But when I looked down at a puddle nearby, the stars moved differently. The shallow drainage ditch where I'd left my floor mat to air dry caught my attention. Overnight rain had filled it with a couple inches of water, creating a strange mirror. When I pressed my fingertip against the water's surface, a ripple temporarily disrupted the reflection. As the ripples calmed, the reflected stars reformed in new positions. My breath caught in my throat. Both the real sky and its puddle reflection remained in perfect focus, but they behaved differently. 3 stars of Orion slid westward across the mirror surface, at a pace I expected from the actual sky, yet the real sky stayed completely still. I shone my phone's flashlight on the water, confirming what I was seeing. The stars were mirrored, but they were moving. I'd been camping with Alina in the Cascades, seeking silence away from technology's constant buzz. Early September offered that perfect transition between summer's warmth and fall's crisp edge. We'd found a secluded clearing surrounded by towering fir and cedar trees, their branches weaving a dense canopy that seemed to swallow all sound. Now alone on a deserted road just past milepost 213, I felt a cold breeze drift across the plains, rustling the grass. Every celestial fixture remained exactly where it had been. I waited 1 minute, then 2. The stars flickered bright in the silent air, punctuated only by distant crickets and my idling engine's lingering echo. My phone showed no signal. Darkness had dropped so thick it felt like velvet. I'd killed the engine and turned off the headlights after pulling over at a turnout. The road stretched empty, without even a guardrail, just gravel and that shallow drainage ditch. The thought of turning around crossed my mind, but I felt too uncertain to move. I needed to see something else. I leaned against the hood, staring upward, watching the sky's impossible stillness. We were in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, late September 2022. As Emma Collins, I typically spend my weekends hiking, especially during fall, when the leaves transform into a vibrant canvas. This trip was different. I'd taken time off work and chosen a less traveled path, and this time, Elena was with me. By 6:30 p.m., our tent was up, and we settled into the wilderness rhythm. Elena unpacked the cooler while I gathered firewood. Our movements relaxed and synchronized. As sunlight softened and faded, we prepared for a simple evening. Sausages over the fire, followed by hot cocoa. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows across the ground and tree bases. We sat close, our backs against cool tree trunks. Eleanor hummed softly, absently poking the flames with a stick. Something felt different about the woods that night. The forest sounds were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to hold its breath. The quiet was so profound it made you strain to listen. That's when I first heard my name. A whisper, just Jason, soft and clear, coming from somewhere beyond the tree line, maybe 50 feet away. No echo, no repetition, just my name carried on the faintest breeze. I asked Elena if she heard it, and she nodded silently. We scanned the shadows between the trees, but saw nothing. No movement, no glowing eyes, just darkness. We thought maybe another camper was calling out, so we yelled back. No response came. Then it happened again. Driving home later, the experience felt surreal. Headlights cut through darkness, the engine's steady hum providing a sense of normality. My phone found signal around milepost 208, just 1 bar. But what would I even say? By the time I reached Lemon, the sky was changing. Stars that had seemed fixed were now creeping westward. I pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot, sat with the engine idling, watching. The earlier puddle reflection was gone, replaced by dry gravel. As dawn approached, I drove home in silence. Pulling into my driveway, I cut the engine and sat in the pastel light, wondering about the boundary between reality and something else. We'd been in those woods for almost 3 hours when everything began to shift. At 9:13 p.m., our campsite was eerily quiet. Jason and Elena sat motionless, their skin tingling as whispers drifted around them. No one was nearby, yet their names echoed softly, almost intimately. The tree line seemed to watch, silent and still. The campfire crackled weakly. No phone signal, as expected. We decided to pack up, thinking maybe an animal or someone was playing tricks. The moment we zipped the tent and stood, the whispering vanished completely. Our boots crunched dry leaves as we hiked out. I kept glancing back, half expecting something to follow. The woods remained absolutely still. Reaching the parking area, we finally exhaled, releasing tension we hadn't realized we'd been holding. Elena's nervous laugh broke the silence. "That was something," she said. I agreed, but my mind was stuck on those strange whispers. They weren't like wind or an echo. Something felt different. During the entire journey home, an unsettling feeling lingered. We'd been watched by something unseen. It wasn't just hearing our names. It was how the forest had transformed, how silence had swallowed every sound. I'm not sure I'll return to that spot soon, but at night when I close my eyes, those whispers return, faint enough to make me question whether they were real or just a trick of memory. Later, on a cool autumn morning near Franconia Knott State Park, I was hiking a 3-mile loop trail. Sunlight filtered through treetops, breaking up the partly cloudy sky. Woodland sounds surrounded me. Birds chirping, boots crunching leaves, small creatures rustling. An hour into the hike, I paused by a stream clearing to drink water. A stone caught my eye, half hidden under fallen leaves. Perfectly circular and smooth, it looked like a hockey puck with a glassy yet matte surface, more uniform than a river stone. I picked it up casually. The moment it touched my palm, a faint vibration began. A faint hum seeped through my skin, barely audible yet unmistakably present. I tilted the stone near my ear, its steady, soft vibration almost soothing. The trail stretched empty around me. Curious, I tucked the stone into my jacket pocket and continued walking. For the next half hour, a quiet buzz seemed to radiate from the stone. I couldn't discern whether it was real or a product of my imagination, but each time I reached into my pocket, I felt its distinct presence. Something began to feel unusual. The trail junction marker appeared sooner than expected, and the trees seemed denser, the path less defined. My phone showed a weak GPS signal, typical for these woods. Intriguingly, the humming grew stronger when I slowed down and faded with faster steps. It was as if the stone responded to my movements, alive in a way beyond my understanding. An unnatural stillness enveloped the forest. No rustling leaves, no bird song, no insect buzz, just an eerie quiet, as if the woods were holding their breath. Branches loomed thicker and more imposing, and a strange silence hung in the air. As I approached a bend where sunlight filtered through the branches, the humming abruptly ceased, like a switch had been flipped. Experimenting, I discovered an invisible boundary. Moving forward past a certain point, silenced the stone completely. Stepping back reintroduced the low, steady hum. The stone seemed to act as a strange indicator of this unseen threshold. The trail ahead wound into darker, denser trees. A subtle pressure from the stone urged me not to proceed. Unease crept over me. After a moment's hesitation, I turned back toward the clearing where I'd originally found the stone. The moment I crossed that invisible line, the humming resumed. I quickened my pace, the stone tucked securely in my pocket. The forest felt transformed. Shadows lingered unnaturally, and an unsettling sensation of being watched followed me. Just before dusk, I reached the parking lot, the mysterious stone's secret still buzzing softly against my leg. I was out checking the fields just past midnight during a late spring night. The pasture was bathed in pale moonlight, clear and cold. Something was immediately wrong. The sheep weren't grazing or wandering as they normally would. Instead, they stood frozen in an unnaturally tight circle, every single one staring straight up at the sky. I rubbed my eyes, thinking exhaustion might be playing tricks. But no, They were definitely focused on a single point. A black shape hung against the moonlight, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't reflecting or shining, but seemed to absorb light like a hole in the sky. Looking closer, I saw it was big and roughly rectangular, with blurry edges that shifted and moved in a way I couldn't define. My skin prickled with a cold, static-like sensation. A faint, low hum hung in the air, not like wind, but something entirely different. The sheep remained completely motionless. When I tried to call out, my voice sounded strange and muffled in the open field. A light pressure built in my head, like gentle fingers pressing against my temples. For a moment, the shape seemed to fold or split, though when I blinked, it returned to a flat, dark mass blocking the stars. No light passed through it, and the moonlight stopped abruptly at its edges. I wanted to move closer, but my legs felt stiff. The silent boundary seemed to whisper a warning. Something extraordinary had occurred, something I couldn't explain. I knew right then that I would never finish that hike. The night held its breath, and so did I. Part of me wanted to retreat to the house, but another part remained frozen, transfixed by this silent presence that seemed completely out of place. The wind had gone completely still. The usual night sounds vanished. No crickets, no distant dogs, no rustling leaves, just a deep, profound silence. Later attempts to research the stone I collected that night yielded nothing. No local legends, no geological matches. It sits in a box on my shelf now, silent and mysterious. The stone no longer hums, but I know what happened that night was real. The night felt cold and unnaturally still. Through the window, a black sheep stood motionless in the field, seeming to absorb moonlight like a void consuming the sky. My phone died when I tried to photograph it, the screen blacking out and the flashlight failing, despite being fully charged earlier. Outside, the sheep were frozen, their eyes fixed upward as if witnessing something beyond human comprehension. They suddenly scattered, bolting toward the barn in a panic. I rushed out to investigate, but whatever had startled them had vanished without a trace. The field remained undisturbed, just damp grass and untouched soil. In the following days, I watched the nighttime field closely. The sheep would huddle together, staring silently into the sky, seemingly waiting for something imperceptible to me. When I shared this experience with neighbors, they brushed it off as a dream or a joke. The local vet suggested animals might sense unusual weather, but the conditions were perfectly normal. I couldn't rationalize what I'd seen. It wasn't a cloud, drone, or airplane, nothing I'd ever encountered before. This mysterious shape simply absorbed moonlight, watching us while the sheep stared with an understanding I couldn't grasp. Since that night, I found myself constantly scanning the evening sky. I haven't seen anything similar again, but sometimes when the sheep fall silent in the middle of the night, I find myself drawn to the window, wondering if that dark presence might return. My flight was routine, a typical work trip from Reno to Las Vegas, dropping off paperwork before heading back. Cruising at 7,500 feet in a straight line southwest from Groom Lake, I was alone in the Cessna 182 with autopilot engaged and instruments under watch. The radio hummed with occasional check-ins from flight control. About 40 minutes into the flight, something unusual caught my eye on the right wing tip. At first, I thought it might be a reflection. The sun was hitting the wing at a sharp angle, potentially creating a misleading glare. But this was no ordinary optical illusion. A smooth, mirror-like object caught my attention near the wing, hovering about 100 feet away. Its size was roughly that of a small car, maybe slightly smaller. No visible edges or seams, just a featureless reflective surface that mirrored the sky and wing with uncanny precision, like a polished metal sheet, but definitely not part of the plane. I double-checked my instruments. Altimeter steady, airspeed normal. The plane remained stable with no unexpected turbulence. My heart rate quickened, not from fear, but pure surprise. In all my years of flying, I'd never seen anything like this. Reaching for the radio, I tried to see if anyone else had reported something in the area. Silence. No chatter, no traffic reports. I switched to the transponder, using code 1200 for visual flight. The radar showed nothing, no blips anywhere near me. Pulling back the throttle slightly, I watched the object maintain its exact position at my wingtip. It didn't move or flicker, instead staying perfectly positioned and matching my speed and heading as if locked in place. I turned the plane slightly left, testing whether it would break formation. It didn't. The object mirrored my moves with flawless precision. I grabbed my phone, attempting to film through the small side window, but the reflection on the glass and the plane's speed rendered the image useless. Just a blur of sky. Control. This is N123DP. Do you have any traffic in my vicinity? Nothing. My mind raced with possible explanations. A drone too big and too smooth with no visible engines or propellers. A weather balloon? They don't hover or match speed like this. Some atmospheric effect. The sky was crystal clear and the object was incredibly well defined. For what seemed like several minutes, it remained motionless. Then, after about 7 minutes, it slowly pulled away from my wingtip. It shimmered briefly and then vanished into the distance as if it had never existed. I was a seasoned pilot flying over Montana that cold morning. The sky stretched endlessly, a canvas of pale light. Something felt off, but nothing in my instrument suggested anything unusual. Later, back home, the memory lingered. Carson Hale, that's me. I know these woods like the back of my hand. A fresh inch of powder covered everything after the cold front, the forest silent and still. At first light I spotted deer tracks, 2 front and 2 back hooves leaving a clear path through the pines. My flight earlier that week had been strange. No warning signs, no system faults. When I landed in Las Vegas, I investigated thoroughly. FAA logs showed nothing. The tower controller confirmed no incidents. My crew dismissed my story as a trick of light or imagination. Overhead, snow-laden branches arched like a canopy. Golden sunlight filtered through tree trunks. My watch reading 7:12 a.m. My phone stayed off in cold country distractions. A dangerous. Bird songs faded as I moved through young firs, and suddenly complete silence descended. But something nagged at me. How solid that thing had looked in the sky. How unaffected my compasses remained. Driving home, I noticed a subtle hum in my car's stereo system, not from the speakers, but underneath. Turning everything off made the sound vanish. Scanning the landscape, I expected to see a buck or coyote, but nothing moved. A small depression in the snow caught my eye, a shallow bowl, as if something heavy had rested there. I shrugged and continued following the deer tracks. In the days that followed, I repeatedly checked my flight log and plane instruments. No errors. But late at night, when I glanced at the wingtip, I sensed that strange presence again, something watching just out of sight. It was the only time I've encountered something so clearly out of place in the sky, yet which left no trace except in my memory. The deer tracks led downhill to a frozen creek bed with glazed, clear ice. My gaiters snapped against the snow as I followed, the tracks dipping onto the ice, sliding forward slightly, then continuing without hesitation. I was trekking across a wide meadow, following deer tracks cutting a straight line through the wind-caught snow and bare grass patches. Ravens had scattered droppings near some rocks, but no fresh signs of activity disturbed the empty landscape. Without thinking, I unzipped my jacket for another layer, an almost reflexive gesture despite not feeling cold. Halfway across the field, something caught my attention. A second set of tracks overlapped the deer's path, men's hunting boots, size 10, pointing in the same direction. The trailing footsteps were slow and deliberate, matching the deer's path with an unsettling precision. Whoever was following seemed more like a shadow than a pursuer. My own steps crunched softly through the snow as I moved carefully, examining the tracks ahead. An unnatural silence enveloped the landscape. No crows called, no wind stirred. Even the snow beneath my boots felt muted, as if the air itself was dense and heavy. I raised my binoculars and scanned the terrain. Nothing moved, no figures, no disturbance along the tree line. About 80 yards ahead, the tracks mysteriously ended where the ground sloped gently toward a hidden ravine. Crouching, I examined the snow closely. No return prints, no boot marks stumbling down the slope, no disturbed snow crystals. It was as if someone had simply vanished. The deer's hoofprints merged with the mysterious boot prints at this point before continuing into the brush. I stood and tested the snow around the track's end. The ground felt different here, firmer, colder. When I stepped, I sank just an inch, while everywhere else gave 2 or 3 inches under my weight. Holding my gloved hand an inch above the surface, I felt a sudden draft, like a trapped mini blizzard. A chill crept over me. My heart raced, but curiosity kept me rooted. I searched for any sign, twigged breaks, cloth scraps, finding nothing. I lifted snow to check the grass underneath, which remained untouched. Something was wrong. I should have left, but something held me in place. I marked the GPS coordinates 48291DN, 114.498DW. The horizon showed only pines to the north, a hill to the south. The world was a blank white canvas. No cabin lights, no road sounds, pure silence. I tied a cloth strip high on a nearby tree to mark the spot. It snapped sharply in the windless air, the sound sharp and sudden. I tracked the deer for hours, following its path through the snow-covered landscape. The tracks were startlingly loud against the white ground. They curved south, skirting the meadow's edge and vanishing into dense woods. My stomach tightened. I'd lost the deer, but returning to the forest alone felt wrong. The open field seemed too empty, as if something watched from the tree line. Dread spread slowly, like ice creeping under my collar. I shifted my pack and continued following the tracks, every sense on high alert. The forest around me stirred. Woodpeckers tapped, chickadees chattered overhead. My breath hung visible in the cold air as I snapped a branch, testing my gun's zero. Nothing seemed out of place, but something felt off. The tracks I'd found ended too cleanly, too intentionally. No explanation made sense. Racing faster than I wanted to admit, my heart pushed me downhill toward the creek. By 9:10 a.m., I'd been out nearly 2 hours, my legs rubbery from the trek. At the tree line, I dropped my pack on the log where I'd left it earlier. One last look at the meadow revealed nothing, no flags, no footprints, just unbroken white snow. The parking lot remained as empty as when I arrived. I tossed my shotgun and pack into the truck, sat down, and closed my eyes. The engine idled, heater warming the cab. Silence surrounded me as I drove home. My phone pinged, my wife asking about breakfast. "Yes, just give me 15, I replied. Inside, the heat felt overwhelming. I hung my coat and boots, washed my gloves in the sink, and tossed a cloth scrap into the trash. Morning light flooded the living room as I stared out the window. The road remained empty. Hours passed, and I kept glancing outside, half expecting something to appear, but the snow lay untouched. I pulled out my map, plotted the GPS point, zooming in to study the contour lines. Then I closed the map and sat back, listening to the house settle as wind howled outside. These prints still haunt me. I know the woods can hide countless secrets, animals, people, echoes of forgotten footsteps, but footprints ending in open snow with no return. I've spent my life tracking game, navigating wild places, yet nothing explains that empty field. Something doesn't add up. Forest was silent that morning, save for the soft rattle of pine needles in the breeze. I'm Carl Jensen, a state wildlife tracker, and this is a story I can't shake. I work in forestry, monitoring tree health, checking for diseases, and setting up environmental sensors. That morning near Flagstaff, Arizona, I was in a section of ponderosa pines closed off due to wildfire risks, with cool, clear mountain air that made everything feel sharp and still. Around 9 a.m., something broke the quiet. A low, deep hum filled the air, not like any machine I'd ever heard. It was steady, almost like a distant engine idling, but no equipment was visible. The sound seemed to come from just beyond a cluster of trees, maybe 50 yards away. Then I saw it. A smooth, dark shape slipped between the tree trunks. I can't call it an object because it had no definable edges or form. Just a black mass, almost reflective in the scattered sunlight, moving with an unnatural, fluid grace. It glided silently, disappearing behind a thick stand of pines as quickly as it had appeared. The forest felt different afterward. Bird calls and wind sounds were muted, like everything was holding its breath. Part of me wanted to investigate, but another part warned me to stay put. I shook off the feeling and continued working, checking sensors and taking readings. By lunchtime, I was back at the ranger station. The break room was quiet when a man walked in, clean-shaven with short black hair, slicked back, wearing a uniform with no identifying patches or logos. That winter, I was staying in a small, converted woodshed behind a farmhouse in northern Vermont, just outside Glover. After everything fell apart in Boston, I needed a cheap, quiet place. Just one room with a cot, a heater, a 5 and a desk. My backyard astronomy hobby had been keeping me focused, tracking mostly star fields, meteor showers, and occasional satellite flares. An afternoon like any other. A man walked in wearing a plain black shirt and pants, an outfit more suited to security personnel or government agents than a forestry office. Without asking, he sat down at my table. I haven't gone back to that spot yet. Maybe I will someday. Or maybe some tracks are better left covered, some stories untold. On a Tuesday night that felt particularly special, I was celebrating my newly approved remote work with a simple beer and grilled cheese. Behind my cabin, my modest telescope setup, I used 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain mounted on a Skywatcher, positioned on a plywood platform, offered a perfect location far from town's light pollution. Winter nights here provided some of the clearest skies I'd ever experienced. Around 1:30 a.m., while studying the Orion Nebula, something unusual caught my eye. A northeastern star I'd seen many times before suddenly blinked, and this wasn't a typical atmospheric distortion. It was a hard, definitive blink. Gone, then back. The pattern was distinctly odd. 3 quick flashes, a long pause, 2 more flashes, then silence. I spent the next hour meticulously tracking the star, checking everything possible. I swapped eyepieces, verified my power source, and reviewed my notes. Nothing explained what I'd witnessed. Eventually, I logged the incident and dismissed it as fatigue. Days earlier, an unexpected encounter had left me unsettled. While working in the forest, a stranger had approached my equipment spread out on the table, a GPS, handheld weather meter, and various measuring tools. In a quiet but firm voice, he inquired about equipment calibration, wanting to know if my instruments were within acceptable parameters. I hesitated, responding that everything seemed fine. He leaned in and cryptically mentioned that accuracy was crucial, warning that deviations could lead to unintended consequences. Before I could ask what he meant, he stood and left the room. When I turned back, he had vanished completely. The rest of the afternoon felt off. My GPS showed strange position jumps, as if I'd moved dozens of feet in an instant. The weather meter fluctuated erratically, and that deep, faint hum returned from beyond the tree line. On my way back to the truck, I caught another glimpse of a dark shape sitting motionless on a rock, almost camouflaged in the shadows. The moment our eyes met, it disappeared into the trees. I didn't mention the encounter to my fellow forestry workers. I wasn't even sure. Since that day, strange lights have flickered between the pines at night. The low hum sometimes returns even when no equipment is running. I can't help wondering if the man was warning me or checking on something I wasn't supposed to see. One thing is certain. This forest is far from ordinary. The night was crisp, cold, snow blanketing the ground in pristine white. My desk lamp cast a soft glow as I half-dozed, waiting for the clouds to clear. Suddenly, a movement caught my eye through the curtain. Approximately 30 feet away, just beyond the tree line, a tall, extremely thin man stood completely motionless. His skin looked almost bluish in the moonlight, dressed in a black overcoat and dark slacks. What struck me immediately was his equipment. A black telescope mounted on a matching matte black tripod, devoid of any visible markings. This wasn't my telescope. Something felt fundamentally wrong. For 10 uninterrupted minutes, he remained absolutely still, eyes fixed to the eyepiece, with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. No adjustments, no notes, just unblinking, unnerving focus. The fresh snow around him remained undisturbed, pristine and untouched. I closed the blackout panel and sat on the floor, uncertain. Calling the police seemed absurd. What would I even say? By dawn, he had vanished without a trace, no tracks, no telescope, no evidence of his presence. Days later, strange occurrences began mounting. A bookmark-sized piece of black paper appeared taped to the observatory window, bearing a perfect white circle centered precisely. By noon, it had disappeared without explanation. No wind, no footprints. The cabin's power started flickering continuously. My telescope mount drifted off alignment, resisting every recalibration attempt. One night, I found it inexplicably pointed toward the woods, though I hadn't touched it. Then came the whispering, a mechanical hum so low, I couldn't discern if it was in the air or inside my head. My recordings always came out blank. Another night brought slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow, circling the cabin, but never approaching. I killed the lights and waited. Nothing. Sleep became impossible. I moved the telescope inside, locked the window, sealed the blackout panel from within, and started keeping a knife by my side. I'm a wildlife photographer who spent years working freelance, taking on small assignments and personal projects. My cabin sits deep in the northern Minnesota woods, with a wide, slow river running behind it, miles from the nearest town. That summer evening started, like many others. The sky faded to an orange-gray light photographers recognized challenging but potentially rewarding. I was set up on a fallen log near the water's edge, camera mounted on a tripod, capturing birds landing on branches and a beaver swimming by. Later, while reviewing my photos, something unusual caught my eye. Dark, irregular shapes floated just beneath the river's surface. These weren't rocks or logs. They were smooth, matte, almost like shadows but more solid. Strangely, they remained unchanged between frames, even as the water moved around them. I initially dismissed it as a camera glitch and deleted the shots. The next day, I returned to the same spot. The shapes appeared again. I zoomed in and tried different angles, but they remained constant. just below the surface, unmoving and distinctly odd. When I mentioned this to a friend, he joked about river spirits, but something felt off. This wasn't the first strange occurrence. Months earlier, while stargazing with my telescope on a clear, moonless night, the stars had simply disappeared, not obscured by clouds, just gone. After 15 to 20 minutes, they reappeared in the same positions, same brightness, as if they'd never vanished. The morning after, I packed everything into my truck and left before sunrise, not even saying goodbye to the farmhouse owners. 2 nights later, while editing photos on my porch, surrounded by the quiet woods with crickets chirping softly and the river's gentle rush, an unexpected car crunched up the gravel driveway. The hour was late, and visitors were unlikely. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Something about the place felt wrong. I hadn't used my telescope since that night a year ago, and now, as a car pulled up outside with an unfamiliar model, I felt a familiar unease creeping in. I stepped out, my shoes polished and white shirt crisp, wearing a black suit that seemed oddly out of place. No tie. The stranger approached the porch without any traditional greeting. "Can I?" My voice wavered slightly. His smile held no warmth. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, pulling out a small notebook. "I'm interested in some photos you've taken." Confusion swept over me. What photos? He was already focused on my camera, flipping the notebook open without revealing its contents. "I believe you have images capturing certain anomalies in the nearby river," he continued. "I'd like to review your camera's memory card." I stepped back, increasingly uncomfortable. "I don't think that's necessary." He nodded, seemingly deaf to my protest, and swiftly removed the SD card. Panic started to rise. I realized I hadn't locked the door. "Please put that back," I insisted. Silence. He turned the card over in his fingers, weighing it thoughtfully. "Water keeps its own secrets," he said quietly. "Sometimes those secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm air. "Who are you?" I asked. After a moment he replied, "Just someone who wants to help you." The porch light flickered. The surrounding woods seemed to darken unnaturally. When I looked back, he was still examining the card. Moving closer, I demanded, "Give that back." Without a word, he returned the card to my camera and handed it over. As quickly as he'd arrived, he got back in his car and drove away. I locked the door and sat down, the camera still warm in my hands. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I say? A strange encounter with no clear threat. The next day, I returned to the river, determined to understand the mysterious shapes. The water appeared normal, clear, and slow. But when I looked through my camera's viewfinder, those same shapes emerged, lurking just beneath the surface. I captured more images and later that night examined them closely on my laptop. As I zoomed in, the details became increasingly unsettling. It was late October, a Thursday, and I was driving home from work through the outskirts of New Richmond, Wisconsin. The sky was mostly clear, but there was a cool, damp feeling in the air, like the kind of chill that clings to your skin when the sun's just dipped below the horizon. The night was settling in as I drove past the local power plant, the large coal-fired facility that everyone in town depends on but jokes about. I'd traveled this stretch of road countless times before, always finding it quiet and uneventful. But this evening, just after 7 p.m., something felt different. Odd lights hovered over the power plant, unlike anything I'd seen before. These weren't standard work lights or warning beacons. They were smaller, brighter, and arranged in a peculiar pattern that defied explanation. They moved slowly, methodically, as if surveying or scanning the facility. I pulled over to the side of the road. My curiosity piqued, but my guard up. The atmosphere felt charged. Air carried a mix of familiar and strange scents, ozone, burning coal, and an unfamiliar metallic sharpness. No headlights. My window cracked open, listening. As darkness fell, I began noticing strange things. Shapes in the water looked solid yet dark, with no reflection or texture, simply existing where they shouldn't. At night, when checking the perimeter, I'd catch fleeting movements between trees, always too quick to identify. My phone would inexplicably die when attempting to call or text. The river would emit a low, vibrating hum at dusk, but only near where I'd been photographing. I shared these experiences with only a few friends, who dismissed them as stress-induced imagination. But I knew something had changed. The words of a mysterious man in black echoed in my mind. Water keeps its own secrets. The shapes remained in my photos, always just beneath the surface, like silent watchers. Sometimes, when the wind was still and the river moved quietly, I could swear something was observing me from the trees, yet when I turned, only shadows greeted me. I haven't returned to the river after dark since that night. I'm not certain what's hidden beneath those waters, but I'm convinced it's not natural. I'm writing this to share my experience, to suggest that perhaps something is watching the quiet, forgotten places. Some secrets might be alive, and they certainly don't want to be discovered. The event started near the power plant with something strange. Lights moved deliberately around the perimeter, almost like a coded message. Not random, but calculated. My phone glitched when I tried to take a picture, so I put it away and watched as the lights slowly vanished behind a cooling tower. A dark car pulled up behind me, engine quiet and without headlights. A man in his mid-40s with slick-back black hair and a dark suit that seemed out of place leaned out the window. "Evening," he said in a professional, measured tone. I responded in kind, and we exchanged brief questions about my location and work. Another car arrived and a second man emerged. Similar build, pale skin, black suit. They began a methodical questioning. What time did I see the lights? About 7:10, heading home from work. Where were they? Hovering over the northern cooling towers for maybe 5 minutes before disappearing behind the towers. The second man, hands folded calmly, asked if I'd seen any workers or maintenance crews. No, it was completely quiet. Just those lights. A heavy silence hung between us. When the first man requested to see my phone, I refused. He didn't press the issue, which only increased my unease. A small badge emerged from the first man's jacket, not quite police, more like a government ID. "We understand it's important that no one else talks about this," the second man said. The company was already aware and handling the situation. "Thank you for your cooperation," the first man said flatly, "and your discretion." They drove away in cars without visible license plates. The second car pulling ahead and vanishing first, followed by the first. The road fell silent, and I sat there, unsettled by the feeling of being watched in a way that made my skin crawl. I worked the late shift at the old radio tower on the edge of Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York. The tower wasn't much, just a rusty metal structure with a cramped room at the top where I managed local emergency broadcasts for a handful of nearby communities. Early November had settled in heavy and quiet, with a cold fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. That night started like any other. I arrived around 9 p.m., grabbed my jacket, and climbed the spiral staircase to the broadcast room. Fog had thickened since dusk, and the windows were already streaked with condensation. Absolute silence surrounded me, broken only by the soft hum of equipment and occasional beeps from the transmitter. Around midnight, while doing routine checks, the radio began to crackle with static. At first, it seemed normal, just interference from weather or a weak, distant signal. But then the static grew louder, as if someone was forcefully pushing through with their own signal. It wasn't a recognizable code or message, just a low, drawn-out hiss that felt wrong. I adjusted the dials, trying to clear the sound, but the static remained, filling the room with an eerie white noise. My friend was naturally skeptical about the encounter. He suggested it was probably just some government agents or company security, making sure I don't spread rumors. But something didn't feel right. Strange occurrences began to pile up. My phone started acting weird, dropping calls and messages without explanation. Once, driving past the plant in daylight, I spotted a black SUV near the gate. Windows tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. No one was inside. Nights became increasingly unsettling. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window. When I looked, nothing was there but the streetlight flickered oddly, and that metallic smell returned. I started taking a longer route home, adding 20 minutes to my commute just to avoid that stretch of road. Weeks passed quietly until one late evening at the office. Nearly 10 p.m., the building was empty except for me. I glanced out the window and glimpsed a dark figure in the street lamp shadows. But when I looked again, nothing remained. I can't shake the memory of those lights, those men, and that mysterious badge I never fully saw. Something larger seems to be happening, something I'm not meant to understand. The night started with a strange radio static that felt almost deliberate. I leaned in, hoping to catch something, but instead I saw him. Just outside the window, past the thick fog, stood a man on the metal catwalk surrounding the tower. His appearance was unsettling. A formal suit and tie, not work gear, with slicked back hair and an unnaturally pale, smooth face. He stood motionless, almost like a statue, with one exception. his hand raised, palm facing me in a clear warning to stop. The room was dim, filled with dense fog and an overwhelming static that seemed to consume every corner. His eyes were fixed on me, though I couldn't tell if they were dark or reflecting the control panel's faint glow. When I tried to reach for the radio, the static rose up, cutting off my voice in a harsh burst. It wasn't just interference. The radio felt like it was actively warning me. Heart racing, I pulled back from the microphone and grabbed my jacket. I watched as he turned and stepped off the catwalk into the fog, completely swallowed by the mist. For a long time, I sat listening to the static, the silence, the machinery's faint hum. When the morning shift arrived, I shared my experience. The static, the mysterious figure. No one believed me. They suggested fatigue or fog-induced hallucinations, but this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, strange occurrences multiplied. My phone started acting weird. Calls wouldn't connect. Texts sent themselves blank, and the screen would flicker with static, even when powered off. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling watched, whether outside or driving home in the darkness. Now, I recognize I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange that night. Sometimes I drive past the plant, but I never stop. And I've never mentioned what I saw to anyone else. Parking my car near the tower's edge, something immediately felt off. A black sedan sat close to the woods, gleaming unnaturally clean compared to the surrounding vehicles. Two men in dark suits emerged with precise, deliberate movements. One locked eyes with me and gave a subtle nod. A chill ran through me as he spoke quietly. "You need to be careful what you say. I'm Mark Reynolds, a 35-year-old from Portland, who loves exploring Oregon's hidden places. Late October had brought cold, damp weather, and I'd been planning this weekend hike for weeks, a chance to escape city pressures and find solitude. My destination was a trail near an abandoned Cold War radar station in the Cascades, a location known only to locals and occasional hikers. As I set up camp beyond the tree line where the radar installation once stood, the landscape told a story of decay. Concrete foundations and rusted antenna pieces were the only remnants of what had once been a bustling site. Around 7 p.m., an unusual sound caught my attention. A low, deep hum unlike any engine or animal noise. It seemed to vibrate through the ground and air simultaneously. Curiosity drew me closer. With my flashlight, I peered toward the tree line and spotted something extraordinary. Small, pale bluish orbs gliding silently beneath the trees. They flickered faintly, moving slowly through the shadows. I strained to count them or understand their origin, but they defied any logical explanation. Radio static began to intensify. Broadcasts would cut in and out, and faint whispers seemed to drift through just before signals disappeared. The men I'd encountered earlier, their cryptic warning and strange presence, haunted my thoughts. Though I never saw them again, an unsettling sensation of being watched took hold whenever I climbed the tower. The two men in the sedan drove away as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving me standing alone in the cold, uncertain. Static eventually faded, and broadcasts returned to normal, but something had changed. Now on certain nights when thick fog rolls in and the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that same soft, steady sound. Hiking through Panther Gorge in the Adirondacks during early fall, I was seeking one last day of outdoor solitude before winter's arrival. The sky hung low and grey, casting a muted light across the landscape. About midway through my loop, I entered a narrow section where dense trees crowded the path, shrinking it to little more than a dirt track. Something felt immediately wrong. The usual forest sounds had vanished. No birds, no rustling leaves, just absolute silence. I stopped, listening intently. Then a flash caught my eye, brighter than a lightning bug, sharper than a camera's click. The forest seemed heavier, the air thicker. This strange experience connected to a series of unsettling events that had been happening at my small rented cabin about 10 miles from the trailhead. Every single night, precisely on the hour, a black sedan would drive past without any headlights. The first time I thought it might be a mistake, and I even tried to flag it down with my flashlight, but the car showed no response. No brake lights, no signal, just a steady, unchanging pace. This continued for 3 consecutive nights. Each time the car would pass by at exactly the same time, moving at the same speed, always in complete darkness. The entire scenario felt surreal, like something from a strange movie. I checked for potential explanations, power outages, road issues, but everything else around seemed completely normal. Curious and slightly unnerved, I mentioned this to a local at a diner in town. When I described the car's behavior, no lights, precise timing, he just shrugged and said, Around here. Some folks keep an eye on that place. You never know. He didn't seem interested in elaborating. That same night, after the car's routine pass, I heard it again, a faint, distant hum. Standing by the window, I scanned the dark forest beyond the road but saw nothing. The next day I returned to the radar site during daylight, hoping to find some answers, but the area looked completely unremarkable. Now, back on the trail, a familiar hiss was creeping back through my radio, like a warning emerging from somewhere just beyond the trees. I left the forest trail feeling uneasy. The hike had been unusually quiet. No bird calls, no rustling leaves. Every tiny sound seemed amplified in the heavy silence. Near the trail's edge, a light had flickered briefly in the deep woods, but when I squinted, I saw nothing definitive. As the sun began to dip lower, I approached a small clearing near the road. A plain black sedan sat parked, engine running but without lights. The driver's window was down, revealing a man who looked completely ordinary. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, with dark hair slicked back, he wore a black suit and an open white collar. His gaze met mine directly, his expression calm and unreadable. "You okay?" he asked in a low, clear voice. I mumbled about finishing my hike, surprised by how strange my own voice sounded in the stillness. "The forest keeps its secrets. Respect them," he said, his tone suggesting more than a casual comment. Later that night, a growing sense of being watched prompted me to double-check every lock on the cabin's doors and windows. Just after midnight, a familiar low hum returned, more intense than before. It vibrated through the walls and floor, steady and unnerving. Outside, I spotted the same black car from earlier, now parked across the street, engine off, lights extinguished. A dark-clothed figure emerged, standing perfectly still for a minute before returning to the vehicle. The car then drove away, still without lights. Sleep became impossible. The next morning, I packed quickly and left, trying to rationalize the experience as a local prank or some odd surveillance. When I returned to my campsite, something immediately struck me as odd. Several concrete slabs appeared freshly cracked, as if something substantial had recently pressed down on them. I photographed the damage, puzzled by what could have caused it. Weeks have passed, and I haven't returned to that area. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I can't explain what happened, but I know what I experienced was real. The uncertainty haunts me still. He shook his head slowly. Not everything is meant to be understood. Sometimes the best thing is to walk away. I had commented, but his response was more warning than casual remark. Before I could ask more, he closed the window, started the engine, and slowly pulled away. The car turned onto the road and disappeared around a bend. I stood there feeling the cold creep in, watching where the car had been. The strange silence remained with me even after I reached my car. Something about that moment didn't feel natural, but I wasn't sure I wanted to understand what had happened. Years later, my work as a night janitor at a restricted Air Force site in Nevada from 24 to 2006 would shape my perspective. These experiences would make the forest encounter seem almost ordinary by comparison. I've worked many odd jobs, but this one was different. Not because of any paperwork I signed, but because people get weird when you talk about certain places. They think you're either making things up or losing your mind. I wasn't. I was just there to clean floors. My job came through a private contractor. They were highly selective, running background checks, polygraphs, and a tight security orientation. Every week, we'd fly in and out of a small civilian airfield near Tanapa, staying on base 4 nights. This was standard protocol. No phones, no cameras, nothing that could transmit a signal. Most buildings looked completely ordinary. Offices, labs, hangars with boring concrete walls, metal surfaces, and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The interesting stuff was always hidden, usually inside those hangars. We had assigned cleaning zones, trash collection, floor waxing, bathroom maintenance. Zones rotated weekly, but one building remained constant. Hangar 4C. You could see it from the mesh or patio, a squat left square structure built into red rock, windowless, with a single east side door. Not exactly secret, just overlooked. An older janitor named Lewis gave me early advice. Don't stare at 4C, don't ask about it, don't go near it. I thought he was joking until he added, "It hums." I didn't believe him. But during my 3rd month working late one night behind the admin building, everything was eerily silent. No wind, no aircraft, nothing. Then I heard it. A faint, deep mechanical hum rising through the ground, like a power transformer under strain. I was working a routine shift, counting supplies in a detached storage unit near 4C. The base felt different that night. Everything seemed normal until the humming started, louder than ever before. Metal shelving rattled as the overhead lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Only the emergency exit signs remained, their light weak and fading. Weeks earlier, Lewis had warned me. Don't linger near 4C, he'd said. Some things in there have been running longer than this base has existed. Some things aren't ours. I'd thought he meant old tech, experimental engines. But something about how he spoke stuck with me. I followed the sound. It grew more pronounced toward the complex's rockier back end. Passing 2 silent hangars, I approached 4C. No external lights, no vents, no wires, just solid matte black steel. The humming wasn't louder, but denser. I could feel it in my ankles. Standing 10 feet from the door, I noticed my breath fogging despite the warm mid-70s night. The air system went silent. That hum was all I could hear. When I stepped outside, the sky looked wrong. Orion was twisted as if someone had mirrored the constellation. The entire base was dark, no windows lit, no spotlights, no headlights. I recalled another strange incident weeks earlier. A new hire stood near 4C at 2 a.m., hands pressed against the wall, seemingly listening. When I called out, he didn't respond. I had to tap his shoulder to break his trance. He looked pale, confused. The next week, he was gone. Just another unexplained reassignment. Walking back to the main path, I tried to stay calm. No alarms, no announcements, just silence, and that deep, persistent hum. As I passed 4C, a new sound emerged. Breathing, not my own. Slow, steady inhalations, like something massive was drawing breath just beyond my perception. The area around the building always felt cold. My fingers would tingle near its doorless entrance, just a card reader with a keypad. I'd learned to keep my distance, aware of the cameras watching from every angle. I never told anyone about what I'd experienced, not even Lewis, but that night, everything changed. I used to work as an air traffic controller at a small FAA center on the Oregon coast near Newport back in 2009. At 29, I was 4 years into the job. Night shifts were my routine. The air traffic control center felt familiar. The sparse setup with a single radar display room, communications console, and a few workstations. Mostly cargo flights and occasional medical evacuations to Portland drifted through the quiet hours. Dan Holloway was my only companion that night. A 20-year veteran who rarely spoke unless something required attention. We weren't close, but I trusted him implicitly. One of those professionals who either knew something definitively or remained silent. Just past 2 a.m., the night was calm. Clear skies. A UPS flight tracked south along the coastline, a corporate jet near Boise. Nothing unusual. My gas station coffee was half finished, a crossword partially solved when something unexpected flickered on the radar screen. A blip appeared in the top right corner over open water. Untagged. Altitude reading. 80,000 feet. No transponder signal. Military operations sometimes run dark, but this wasn't in any scheduled corridor. Dan noticed too, raising his eyebrows without a word. The air felt impossibly cold. Something unspoken hung in the space between us. I walked to the janitor's trailer, sat in darkness for 20 minutes until the lights returned. Nobody mentioned it the next morning. Lewis's cryptic response when I asked, "You stayed out too long." Months later, I was reassigned to Facility 7B, further from the ridge. I never saw the 4C location again. During my final debriefing, a nameless official was clear. Sign the document. Never discuss what happened. I complied. What I experienced wasn't visual. More a sensation. A low, underground hum. A coldness that lingered after leaving. The radar screen had shown something impossible. A signal at 80,000 feet dropping instantly to sea level. No gradual descent. Just total disappearance. That building remains locked. Humming. The radar screen flickered with an unusual return. Something felt different this time. Ghost signals happened often, but this one held steady despite potential weather interference. Dan leaned closer, silent and intense. We watched carefully. Suddenly, the signal vanished completely, not drifting off the edge, but blinking out mid-grid, as if someone had flipped a switch. No trail, no gradual descent. I pulled up the raw radar playback, hoping for a system glitch explanation. Nothing made sense. The return showed a precise sequence. High-altitude appearance, brief hold, instant drop to sea level, then total disappearance. The system diagnostic revealed everything functioned normally. No errors, no drop pings. Against standard procedure, I printed hard copy logs. Something wasn't right. Around 2 a.m., two unidentified men arrived without warning. No uniforms, no recognizable vehicle. They used badge access through the side entrance, claiming to be contract IT support from Seattle. One went directly to the radar terminal, while the other requested system logs from Dan. When I asked who called them, Dan's response was simple: not us. They stayed until just after 5 a.m. Upon leaving, the entire system had been completely rebooted. Hard drives were purged. Every radar sweep from 1 to 4 a.m. was overwritten. My printed logs vanished. Dan and I exchanged a knowing look. He cut off my attempt to speak. "Don't," he said. We finished the shift normally, logged a quiet night, no incidents. A week later, the manager called me in for a standard review. "Remember anything strange?" I replied, "No, just a quiet night." They smiled. "Thought so." We were road tripping from Phoenix to Reno, hitting ghost towns, planning to hike Zion, maybe gamble for a night. Rachel was just another stopover, a tiny blip on the map we'd barely registered. The Moonlight Motor Inn sat like an old trailer from the 70s. 6 rooms faced a cracked lot surrounded by endless desert. A dusty diner across the road looked frozen in 1982. We rolled in around 6:30, just before sunset. Randy, the front desk guy with an older white beard, handed us an actual key on a blue plastic tag. When we mentioned heading to Reno, he nodded like we'd announced some impossible journey. "You kids staying just one night? That's smart," he said, then paused and looked out the window. "Don't go wandering after dark," he added. I chuckled, assuming he meant coyotes or snakes. Megan didn't even hear him. We had just arrived at the motel. Our backpacks dropped as soon as we stepped inside. The room was surprisingly clean, with a stained carpet but fresh sheets. A small table, bulky TV, and humming mini-fridge filled the space. Outside, the desert sky transformed into a brilliant orange as we walked to the nearby diner. The place was typical: basic burgers, fries, and watery coffee. 2 truckers played cards in the back while Patty Klein played on the jukebox. The waitress smiled, that weird smile, her eyes not matching, as if she'd heard every story 1,000 times. Around 8:15, we were back at the motel, cracking open beers and sitting on the curb. The night cooled quickly but remained warm. Stars emerged impossibly clear. I'm not usually one for scenery, but out here the sky was something else. Megan knew her constellations, pointing them out while I tracked satellites drifting overhead. Around 9 p.m. something caught her eye. Low on the southern horizon, a bright white light hung motionless. I initially dismissed it as an aircraft from the nearby Groom Lake base, but something felt off. It remained perfectly still, defying the movement of other objects in the sky. Suddenly, the light began rising, not like a typical aircraft, but straight up with an unnatural controlled speed. We both stood, watching intently. Then came the moment that still haunts me. In an instant, the single white dot split into 2 lights, positioned side by side. No dramatic transition, just a sudden separation. They hovered briefly before vanishing completely. Not fading, not flying away, just disappearing as if a switch had been flipped. No sound, no trace, nothing. When we looked at each other, no words were necessary. Something extraordinary had just occurred. Back in the motel room, an unsettling quiet descended. I locked the door, something I never do, and turned on the TV, seeking comfort. Only static greeted us, the screen flickering before turning an eerie blue. The silence was deafening. Dan transferred to Phoenix months later. I left the FAA the following year. I've never seen anything like that night again, nothing even close, but I think about it more than I probably should. The night sky was a canvas of darkness, sprinkled with the Milky Way like scattered salt. Silence surrounded us, broken only by occasional wind gusts. We were camping near Cinder, taking an unmarked trail deep into quiet wilderness. No cell service, no traffic, just us and the landscape. Our gear was minimal: 1 tent, 2 sleeping bags, a jet boil, trail mix, and canned soup. Kayla brought her big old camera, its strap fraying at the edges, capturing everything from trees to trails to sky. The first night, we set up camp by a shallow creek, about 4 miles in. Earlier, the TV signal at our motel room had been strange, and we'd left it on just for some light. Around 1 a.m., Megan woke me up, standing by the window. "Something's out there," she whispered. Looking out, I saw the dark desert with faint hill outlines. The security light flickered. Nothing unusual. Then, about 100 yards into the scrub, a weird round glow appeared, like a stationary softball-sized flashlight. No spreading light, just a perfect circle. "It's moving," Megan's, and it was drifting silently just above the ground, gliding left to right in a straight line before stopping. I pulled the curtain closed. We didn't sleep. Instead, we sat in the blue TV light, quiet. Eventually, the signal returned with a news anchor's voice, though I wasn't really listening. By morning, everything looked normal. Pale blue sky, a diner serving fresh coffee, 2 truckers still playing cards, as if time had stood still. We checked out around 8. Randy was gone. A woman in her 40s at the desk smiled politely, as if our previous interactions had never happened. Pulling out of the lot, I glanced back. Nothing in the sky, nothing in the hills, but something had changed. The TV signal stayed strong for the rest of our trip, and the stars never looked as clear again. At our campsite, we felt peaceful after dinner, laughing about not constantly checking our phones. Kayla joked about deleting Instagram, though we both knew she'd never follow through. She loved posting too much. Around 3 a.m., something woke me up. The tent fabric seemed to move as if something had brushed against it, but the trees were completely still. When I unzipped the flap to investigate, nothing was there. No animals, just the quiet sound of the creek. Kayla was zipped into her sleeping bag, facing away from me. Morning brought an odd conversation, but the details of what she said slipped from my memory now. Our camping trip started off strange when Kayla mentioned hearing whispers during the night, but I hadn't noticed anything unusual. The next day felt different. Typically talkative, Kayla was completely silent, just walking ahead and taking pictures. Storm clouds gathered quickly in the late afternoon, drenching us before we could set up the tent. We huddled under dense pine trees, creating a hurried and wet campsite. Something felt wrong from the start. Kayla muttered about the location feeling off, and her camera fogged up mysteriously. That night, a bizarre experience unfolded. A bright white light hung motionless outside our tent, unlike any flashlight I'd seen. I found myself frozen, unable to move or call out. An unseen presence seemed inches away, just beyond the tent fabric. The air grew impossibly heavy, then everything went dark. Morning light woke me, but Kayla was nowhere to be found. Her camera, which she never left behind, remained. Her boots were missing, so I initially assumed she'd gone for a short walk. Hours passed with no sign of her. I circled the campsite, calling her name with increasing desperation. By noon, I was shouting. I climbed a rock ridge, spinning and scanning the forest, but found nothing. No footprints, no trace. Panic drove me to leave everything behind. I drove until I found cell service and called 911. Search and rescue teams were dispatched by nightfall. A deputy made me wait at the ranger station while the first group investigated. They found our campsite the next morning, my tent, our food, a sleeping bag, but no Kayla. Then things got truly strange. When they asked for photos of her, I realized something was wrong. I tried to show them pictures from my phone, but every single image of Kayla had vanished. Photos from our road trip, from the grocery store, from previous hikes, all gone. It made absolutely no sense. A blurry selfie I distinctly remembered taking had completely disappeared. My work took me to a remote botany field lab in central Utah, nestled in a narrow gulch south of the San Rafael Swell. Just me, a generator, endless sandstone and sagebrush stretching to the horizon. The station was designed for one person, with tiny living quarters and an attached greenhouse. My days were quiet, cataloging genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. That week, the landscape held its bee wreath. Last winter vanished along with Kayla's memory. At the coffee spot, I asked about her. Dark blonde hair, denim jacket with patches. The barista didn't recognize her name. Same story at the art supply store where she used to work weekends. Back home, her tent still stood with 2 sleeping bags. The blue one had her name tagged inside in Sharpie. K. Darnell, clear as day. Strange how memories persist when everything else fades. She called Fern's Forest Squid once, and now that's all I think about when I see them. She lives in my head while the world pretends she never existed. At the gas station, it was just me in the frame now. I told the deputy it had to be a glitch. Maybe my phone corrupted something, or the cloud backup failed. He nodded, but didn't say much. They asked for her full name. I said Kayla Darnell, spelled it out. Gave her birthday, where she worked, everything I knew. They ran it and came back saying there was no record of anyone by that name in Oregon. I thought maybe they had the spelling wrong, so I pulled up my text to show them messages from her. There were none. Not a single message from her number. I scrolled through months of conversations. Nothing. I checked my contacts. Her number wasn't saved. My call log had no history of us talking, even though we'd confirmed the trip just 3 days before. I gave them the number anyway. They dialed it, disconnected. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up my social media. Kayla wasn't in any of it. No tags, no comments, no likes. We'd been friends for almost 3 years. We met at a film festival in Bend. She'd introduced me to half the people in my network. She'd posted pictures of us hiking dozens of times. Now, there was nothing, not even her profile. I checked mutual friends. No one seemed to know who I was talking about. I called people, old co-workers, a guy she dated, marked a waypoint on my GPS app, and started hiking back out fast. It was dusk when I reached the trailhead. The silence was absolute. No breeze stirred, no insects buzzed, and the air hung heavy and stale. Even after dark, the heat lingered differently. Tuesday morning marked a turning point. My Arduino-based soil sensor system, typically reliable, showed something peculiar. A complete 5-hour gap existed between midnight and 5 a.m. The system had flatlined and then resumed as if nothing occurred. I meticulously checked everything. Wi-Fi was operational, the generator ran smoothly. In the greenhouse, an unsettling discovery awaited. An LED grow light bore a half-melted plastic casing as though a blowtorch had touched its edge, which was impossible given its distance from any heat source. Previously, I'd dismissed similar sensor irregularities as electrical quirks. At precisely 2 a.m., the night sensor alarm erupted with 3 sharp beeps, signaling a dangerous pH drop below 4.0, completely abnormal for this soil. Boots on, flashlight ready, I ventured outside. The air carried an unusual scent, not quite smoke, but reminiscent of burned dust and scorched minerals. The smell one might associate with a lightning strike on rocky terrain. Upon opening the greenhouse door, a rush of unexpected humidity escaped. I hadn't watered anything, and no rain had fallen in days. The glass was completely fogged over. Inside, something was profoundly wrong. Every single plant had rotated with impossible precision, all facing inward toward a bare meter-wide patch of soil I'd reserved for new specimens. The ground appeared undisturbed, yet strangely compressed. A smooth, even circle, as if something had rested there. No prints, no marks. Above this spot, the glass ceiling displayed a faint black scorch mark spreading outward in a foot-wide ring. Spider web-like cracks radiated from the center, and the metal framing seemed subtly warped with an odd heat distortion. I backed out and locked the door. The next morning I examined the time-lapse camera. Footage ran normally until 12:47 a.m. when it suddenly glitched. One frame showed static, then black, then white. The timestamp reviewing raw image files revealed a disturbing pattern. Every file between 12:47 and 4:51 was corrupted, nothing more than digital noise. A recovery program would uncover 437 mysterious fragments. Thursday night, I decided to keep watch in the greenhouse with a flashlight, uncertain what I might witness. Around 1:30, something strange happened. The temperature dropped sharply from 77 to 61°C in under 5 minutes. Confined only to the greenhouse, my arm hair stood on end. The air felt electrified. LED lights flickered and then shut off completely. An eerie silence followed. Total stillness. No generator hum, no wind, not even distant insect sounds. I'm uncertain how long this lasted. Maybe 2 minutes, perhaps 10. When I switched my flashlight back on, the central bare spot looked darker, as if wet, though no rain had fallen. The plants were slightly teally tilted again. Earlier, while clicking through camera thumbnails, most were just garbage data fragments. A few caught my eye, brief flashes of color, like violet and pale green, as if the lens had captured a sudden burst of light. One image showed a blurry curve of something smooth and metallic in the top right corner, without any identifying features. I deleted the corrupted files and switched off the camera. That's when the plant started behaving oddly. Gallium leaves curled inward as if trying to close around something invisible. 2 wild barley pots bent their stems at sharp 90° angles towards a central bare spot, maintaining that position even after I rotated the pots. When I moved a fern back to the bench's edge, I found it tipped over and facing the center again the next morning. The next morning revealed more oddities. All 6 soil sensors were burnt out. Plastic casings bubbled, wires melted into the dirt. Strangely, my laptop remained untouched, and nothing else in the greenhouse showed damage. I radioed in, citing a hardware malfunction as my reason for cutting the trip short. They didn't probe further. Before leaving, I collected a small soil sample from the central patch, sealing it in a jar that now sits on a shelf in my apartment. Over the following days, the sample dried out completely. The glass has changed over time. its deep red now fading to a muted grey. A thin, almost imperceptible ring traces the inner edge where the soil seems to have been nudged away from the center, leaving behind a ghostly residue. Occasionally, when I pass by, a fleeting scent catches me, that familiar burned dust smell that vanishes almost as quickly as it appears. I apologize, but you did not include the original text in your message. Could you please provide the text you would like me to rewrite? Once you share the text, I'll be happy to help you restructure it.